stop scrolling. Because what you're about to hear is not a rumor, not a leak, and not a whisper anymore. After weeks of silence, Teyana Taylor has finally spoken, and her words are shaking this entire controversy to its core. For the first time, she's responding directly to the shocking accusations tied to Pierre. And according to Teyana, this wasn't confusion. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was intentional. She says her silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Because while the internet was exploding, while names were dragged and narratives were written without her voice, she was watching, waiting, gathering. And now, she's calling it what she says it really is, a malicious attempt to destroy her image, her career, and her name. But here's where it gets intense. Teyana claims the situation goes far beyond gossip. She hints at receipts, legal documentation, and people close to the situation who allegedly know what really happened behind closed doors. Fans are already split. Some are rallying behind her, calling her a victim of a calculated smear campaign. Others believe this is turning into a full-blown celebrity revenge war. So the question isn't just what was said. The question is, who's playing the game? And who's about to lose everything when the truth finally drops? And trust me, this story is just getting started. To understand why this moment feels so explosive, you have to rewind. Way back before the headlines, before the accusations, before the silence turned into suspicion. Because according to people close to the situation, this controversy didn't come out of nowhere. It was building quietly, behind smiles, cameras, and carefully curated public images. Teyana Taylor has always been seen as untouchable. A multi-talented force, music, fashion, film. Someone who controlled her narrative with precision. She wasn't just admired, she was respected. For years, her image was built on strength, discipline, and independence. No scandals, no public meltdowns, no messy explanations. When she moved, it was intentional. When she spoke, it mattered. And when she went silent, people listened even harder. Pierre, on the other hand, was rising fast. Industry insiders described him as focused, private, and carefully guarded. He wasn't loud online. He didn't overshare. His career growth felt calculated, steady, almost surgical. To fans, he represented the next level, a serious talent stepping into bigger rooms, bigger conversations, and bigger power circles. On the surface, there was no reason for their names to ever collide like this. But behind the scenes, sources claim tensions had been quietly brewing. Not public, not obvious, just subtle shifts, unfollowings, distance, changed energy. Things most people wouldn't notice unless they were looking closely. And the internet? The internet always looks closely. According to people who claim knowledge of the situation, disagreements began long before any accusations ever reached the public. Not explosive arguments, but fractures, the kind that start small and grow dangerous when nobody addresses them directly. Conversations that allegedly didn't end cleanly. Misunderstandings that were never clarified. And egos that may have felt threatened as careers moved in different directions. Then came the silence. For weeks, rumors circulated without confirmation. Clips were shared out of context. Comment sections turned into courtrooms. Everyone had a theory, and every theory painted someone as the villain. But through all of it, Teyana said nothing. No tweets. No stories. No emotional live streams. Nothing. That silence became its own weapon. Fans began asking questions. Critics began writing narratives. And speculation started mutating into something far more dangerous. Assumptions presented as truth. According to Teyana, this is where everything crossed the line. In her words, what followed wasn't accidental. She claims the narrative being pushed wasn't about confusion or concern. It was about damage. Damage to her credibility. Damage to her reputation. Damage to a career she says she spent years building without shortcuts. And this is important. Teyana isn't saying there was never conflict. She isn't pretending nothing happened. What she is saying very clearly is that the story being told publicly is not the truth. She describes it as a character assassination campaign fueled by selective leaks, strategic silence, and what she believes were deliberate attempts to let the internet do the dirty work. According to her, once the narrative caught fire, it didn't need facts anymore, it just needed momentum. Meanwhile, Aaron's side of the story began circulating in fragments. Not full statements, not official clarifications, just enough to keep the conversation alive. And in today's culture, fragments are dangerous, because fragments invite imagination, and imagination fills gaps with extremes. As days passed, the story stopped being about two individuals and turned into a spectacle. Blogs amplified it. Reaction channels monetized it. Commentators took sides. And suddenly, this wasn't just a personal dispute, it was public theater. Behind closed doors, sources claim lawyers were consulted. Inner circles tightened. Phones rang. Screenshots were saved. And while the public saw chaos, both sides were allegedly preparing very different endgames. Teyana now says her silence during that time was intentional. She claims she was advised not to respond emotionally, not to chase headlines, and not to correct every rumor. Instead, she says she focused on documentation, on protecting herself legally and strategically before saying a single word. And that's what makes this moment different. This isn't a late-night rant. This isn't damage control through tears. This is a calculated response, one she believes flips the entire narrative. Because according to her, what the public saw was only the surface. What really happened, she claims, sits in private messages, legal paperwork, and conversations that never made it online. Now, with fans divided and the internet demanding answers, the silence is officially over. But here's the unsettling part. If Teyana is telling the truth, then this controversy isn't about misunderstanding. It's about intent. And if she isn't, then the fallout is about to get even worse. Either way, one thing is clear. This was never just gossip. This was a collision waiting to happen. And as her response begins to unfold, the story is about to take a turn that no one saw coming. The moment Teyana Taylor finally broke her silence, the narrative didn't just shift, it fractured. Until then, the story had lived in whispers, half-statements, and carefully worded speculation. People argued in comments, reaction channels picked sides, and blogs recycled the same lines over and over again. But once Teyana spoke, the conversation stopped being abstract. It became personal. According to Teyana, what the public had been reacting to wasn't confusion or concern. It was a story deliberately shaped to hurt her. She claims that the allegations tied to Aaron Pierre were not only false, but strategically framed to cause maximum reputational damage. In her words, the goal wasn't clarification. It was control. Control of the narrative. Control of perception. And ultimately, control over her career trajectory. This is where the conflict escalates from rumor to warfare. Teyana says the allegations did not appear suddenly. She claims they were slowly introduced, allowed to circulate just long enough to feel credible without ever being officially confirmed. According to her, that delay was intentional because silence creates space, and space invites speculation. And speculation, once unleashed, becomes impossible to fully contain. She describes watching her name trend while false assumptions hardened into facts in real time. Brands allegedly began asking questions. Industry conversations allegedly shifted. And opportunities, she claims, quietly paused, not because of proof, but because of uncertainty. That's when she says she realized this wasn't about a disagreement anymore. This was about damage. According to Teyana, the most painful part wasn't the accusations themselves. It was the implication behind them. She claims the narrative being pushed suggested recklessness, irresponsibility, and deception. Not just professionally, but morally. And in an industry where image is currency, those implications can be devastating. But here's where the first major twist enters. Teyana doesn't deny that Aaron was aware of the impact these claims would have. In fact, she suggests the opposite. She claims he understood exactly how explosive the allegations were and still allowed them to circulate without immediate correction. That detail changes everything. Because if true, this stops being about misunderstanding and starts looking like strategy. According to sources close to Teyana, Internal conversations were happening while the internet burned. Advisors allegedly urged her to respond quickly, to deny everything outright. But she refused. She believed that reacting too fast would only feed the fire. Instead, she chose silence, but not passivity. Behind the scenes, she claimed she began documenting everything. Timelines, messages, conversations, what was said, when it was said, and who knew what at each stage. She describes it as preparing for a moment she knew was coming, when the story would demand more than denial. And then, just as the narrative seemed locked against her, something unexpected happened. The first crack appeared. A source from within the extended circle, someone not publicly aligned with either side, began questioning inconsistencies in the story being circulated. Small things at first. Dates that didn't line up. Statements that shifted subtly over time. Claims that changed wording, depending on the platform. Nothing dramatic enough to trend, but enough to make people pause. And once people pause, momentum slows. Teyana says that's when she decided it was time. Her statement wasn't emotional. It wasn't chaotic. It wasn't rushed. It was deliberate, and that alone unsettled people. Instead of attacking Aaron directly, she focused on process, on how narratives are formed, on how silence can be weaponized, and on how allegations, once released, can never be fully retracted, even if proven false later. She didn't just say, "This isn't true." She said, "This was done to me." That framing changed the energy completely, because now the question wasn't what happened. It was, why was this allowed to happen this way? According to Tayiana, the most damaging part of the situation wasn't public reaction, it was private confirmation. She claims people who knew the truth stayed quiet while watching the narrative spiral. And in her view, silence in moments like that isn't neutral. It's participation. But the twist doesn't end there. Shortly after her statement, insiders claim conversations began resurfacing, messages and timelines that suggested the situation may have been far more complex than either side initially presented. Again, not proof of innocence or guilt, but proof of context. And context is dangerous because it disrupts clean villain narratives. Fans who were once firmly divided started asking different questions. Not who's lying, but who benefits? Not what was said, but who controlled when it was said? That's when the conversation shifted from personal conflict to power dynamics. Because if allegations can be introduced without accountability, if silence can be used as a shield, and if public opinion can be guided through implication rather than evidence, then this isn't just a celebrity dispute. It's a case study in how reputations are shaped and destroyed in the digital age. Teyana claims she recognized that early, and that's why she waited. She says her goal now isn't to trade accusations, but to expose the mechanism behind them. To show how easily a narrative can be engineered when timing, ambiguity, and public appetite collide. And yet, despite all of this, Aaron's side remains largely unchanged. No full rebuttal. No detailed clarification. Just distance. That absence becomes the loudest sound in the room. Because at this stage, silence doesn't read as restraint. It reads as calculation. And that leads to the most unsettling realization so far. What if this was never meant to be resolved publicly at all? What if the damage was the point? If Teyana is right, then the allegations weren't about truth. They were about leverage. About forcing her into a defensive position while others controlled the pace of the story. And if she's wrong, then her response risks escalating a situation that could spiral even further. Either way, the first twist is clear. This conflict is no longer about what was alleged. It's about who allowed the allegation to live. And now that Teyana has disrupted the flow, the next phase won't be subtle. Because once documentation, legal positioning, and inner circle confirmations enter the equation, the story stops being gossip and starts becoming something else entirely. A showdown. And in the next chapter, the focus shifts from accusation to evidence, from reaction to receipts, and that's where things get truly uncomfortable. The moment Teyana's statement hit the timeline, the fire didn't just spread, it multiplied. What began as a tense back and forth suddenly turned into a full-scale digital explosion. Screenshots flew. Old interviews resurfaced. Reaction videos stacked up by the minute. And somewhere inside that chaos, the story took a sharp, unexpected turn. Because this time, it wasn't just words. According to people close to the situation, Teyana's camp quietly began signaling something far more serious than a public denial. Not proof, positioning. The kind that suggests preparation, not panic. The kind that implies she wasn't reacting to a crisis, she was anticipating the next move. Then came the shock. A well-connected industry insider hinted, without posting anything concrete, that documentation exists contradicting the narrative being pushed against Teyana. Not medical details, not private data, but timelines, communications, and third-party confirmations that allegedly undermine the way the accusations were framed and released. That single hint detonated everything, because suddenly, the conversation shifted from what was said to what can be shown. And once that door opens, nobody walks away clean. Social media erupted with speculation. People began dissecting dates, cross-referencing posts, analyzing who said what and when. Fans noticed subtle edits in earlier statements, wording that had changed, context that had quietly disappeared, even platforms where comments were suddenly limited or removed. Coincidence? Or containment? That's when a second, more disturbing twist surfaced. Multiple sources claimed that Teyana had warned privately before anything went public that allowing vague allegations to circulate without clarity would cause irreversible harm. According to these insiders, she asked for one thing: precision or silence. She allegedly got neither. And if that's true, then the situation stops looking like miscommunication and starts looking like recklessness at best, or intent at worst. What made this revelation even more explosive was how the industry responded. Instead of distancing themselves from the drama, certain figures reportedly began reaching out to Teyana's team, not to question her, but to verify. To ask quietly whether the documentation rumors were real. Because in an industry built on relationships, credibility matters more than noise. And here's where the escalation peaks. Late one night, a cryptic message appeared from an account linked to someone within the broader circle, not confirming anything, not denying anything, but suggesting that the public story is incomplete. That key context had been omitted. That once it surfaces, opinions would shift fast. The post vanished within minutes. But screenshots don't. That disappearance alone was enough to send fans into a frenzy. Why delete if there's nothing to hide? Why hint at context if it doesn't change the narrative? Meanwhile, Teyana remained calm. Almost too calm. She didn't flood the internet. She didn't respond to every accusation. She posted once more, short, controlled, and devastating in its restraint. She wrote that she had nothing to gain from chaos and that truth doesn't need volume. That line alone became a rallying cry. Supporters claimed it was the posture of someone confident. Critics argued it was strategic ambiguity. But everyone agreed on one thing: the situation had officially crossed the point of no return. Because now, the stakes were no longer reputational. They were structural. If documentation exists, if timelines contradict public narratives, and if third parties can confirm what was privately known, then this story isn't about celebrity drama anymore. It's about how easily a life can be destabilized through implication. And the most chilling part? According to insiders, this reveal wasn't the final card. They claim Teyana's team is holding back, waiting to see how the other side moves next. Waiting to see whether clarification comes voluntarily or is forced by exposure. Which leads to the question hanging over everything now. If the truth really is coming soon, as Teyana says, who's racing to get ahead of it and who's about to be caught standing still when it drops? Because from this point on, silence won't protect anyone. And the next phase won't be about speculation. It'll be about fallout. By the time dawn hit, this was no longer a story. It was a digital riot. Every platform lit up like a fuse had been struck. Timelines refreshed faster than facts. Hashtags climbed, fell, and climbed again. And suddenly, everyone had a side, even those who swore they didn't care about celebrity drama. Two camps formed almost instantly. On one side, supporters rallied around Teyana, calling her response measured, strategic, and overdue. They framed her silence as restraint, her words as precision. "This is what composure looks like," one viral post read. "She didn't scream. She documented." That line alone racked up thousands of shares in hours. On the other side, critics weren't buying it. They accused her of narrative control, of timing her response to regain leverage. "Why now?" they asked. "Why not immediately?" To them, the calm wasn't confidence, it was choreography. And between those extremes sat millions of confused observers, scrolling, refreshing, and asking the same question in different ways. Who do you believe when everyone claims receipts? The comment sections turned into battlegrounds. Fans dug up old interviews, clipped past statements out of context, and tried to connect dots that may or may not have ever belonged together. Reaction channels posted back-to-back breakdowns, each one louder than the last, each one promising the missing piece. Then the industry reacted, and that's when things got serious. Quietly at first. According to insiders, publicists, brand reps, and collaborators began reassessing risk. Not canceling, pausing. Meetings delayed. Decisions postponed. The kind of soft freeze that doesn't make headlines but sends a clear message behind the scenes. Because in high-stakes environments, uncertainty is the real liability. What made the reaction even more intense was how divided public figures became. Some celebrities posted vague messages about truth always surfacing without naming names. Others warned against trial by timeline. A few liked posts they later unliked, too late for screenshots. Every move was dissected. One well-known industry voice reportedly reached out to both sides, urging clarification before the narrative hardened further. That outreach alone fueled speculation. If mediators are stepping in, the fallout must be bigger than we're seeing. And then came the fan wars. Supporters on both sides accused the other of blind loyalty, of weaponizing empathy, of confusing defense with denial. Trending threads turned into long, aggressive debates about accountability, silence, and power dynamics in public accusations. No one was neutral anymore. News blogs jumped in, each framing the story differently depending on their audience. Some headlines emphasized Teyana's denial and claims of character assassination. Others highlighted the unresolved nature of the allegations. The same facts, if you can call them that, produced wildly different conclusions. That fragmentation only deepened mistrust. Meanwhile, Aaron's camp remained minimal. No extended statement. No detailed clarification. Just enough presence to avoid disappearance, but not enough to steer the narrative back. And that absence spoke volumes. To supporters of Tayiana, it looked like avoidance. To critics, it looked like restraint. Either way, it allowed speculation to breathe, and speculation thrives in silence. Then a new wave hit. A prominent commentator suggested that both sides might be preparing for something bigger, not online but offline. That legal positioning could already be underway. That the public was only seeing the surface tension of a much deeper standoff. That suggestion alone reignited everything. If this is heading toward formal action, then every post, every word, every like becomes evidence. And suddenly, the chaos feels less spontaneous and more like a countdown. Teyana's supporters doubled down, urging patience and warning against rushing judgment. Her critics hardened, insisting that unanswered questions are still unanswered. And the industry? It watched carefully, weighing reputation against risk. Because when narratives collide at this level, careers don't just wobble. They rear out. And as the noise grew louder, one thing became painfully clear. This controversy isn't burning out. It's consolidating. Lines are being drawn. Positions are being locked. And with each passing hour, the cost of staying silent, or speaking too soon, rises. Which brings us to the most unsettling realization yet. Public opinion has already moved on from what happened to who survives this. And in the final chapter, a single reveal threatens to flip that question on its head, again. Just when it felt like the story had reached its loudest point, it did something far more dangerous. It went quiet. Not the kind of quiet that means resolution, but the kind that signals movement behind closed doors. According to multiple insiders, the tone shifted almost overnight. Conversations stopped happening in comment sections and started happening in private. Phones rang. Meetings were scheduled. And suddenly, people who had been very comfortable speculating publicly became extremely careful with their words. Because a new detail surfaced, one that reframed everything. Sources close to the situation claim that a previously unseen timeline exists. Not medical, not graphic, not sensational, but procedural. A step-by-step record of who knew what when they knew it, and how the narrative was allowed to travel before anyone stepped in. If that's true, then this story isn't about a single accusation anymore. It's about responsibility. Insiders allege that this timeline doesn't just challenge public assumptions, it challenges intent. It suggests that certain parties may have understood the damage a vague allegation could cause and still chose delay over clarity. And delay, in this context, is power. That's the twist no one was prepared for. Because if responsibility can be traced, not to what was said, but to what wasn't corrected, then the question of guilt shifts dramatically. It stops being about proving or disproving a claim and starts being about allowing harm to happen. Teyana's camp, according to sources, hasn't denied the existence of this timeline. They haven't confirmed it either. Instead, they've let one message circulate quietly. Context changes everything. And that line terrified people. Because context doesn't just explain, it exposes. Meanwhile, Aaron's side remains cautious. Still no full breakdown. Still no comprehensive clarification. Just enough distance to avoid escalation, but not enough to shut the door on doubt. That balance is fragile. One wrong move, one incomplete statement, one leaked confirmation, and the entire structure collapses. Fans noticed it too. The energy online changed from rage to anticipation. Instead of shouting, people started waiting, watching, saving screenshots, archiving posts. Because everyone sensed the same thing. This isn't over. It's aligning. And then came the most chilling hint of all. A respected industry figure reportedly told a close associate that, when this part comes out, nobody's timeline will look the same. Not reputations, timelines. The order of events. The sequence that determines who acted responsibly and who didn't. That single comment sent shockwaves through both camps. Because if timelines flip, narratives flip. And when narratives flip, loyalties follow. Teyana herself hasn't celebrated. She hasn't hinted at victory. In fact, she's pulled back even further, posting less, speaking less, and letting the pressure build on its own. That restraint feels intentional, like someone who knows the next move doesn't belong to the internet. And here's the cliffhanger no one can ignore. If this timeline is real, if documentation confirms delay over duty, if context proves more damaging than accusation, then the biggest fallout hasn't happened yet. Because the story won't end with who said what. It'll end with who waited and why. And when that answer comes out, it won't just change opinions. It'll change careers. Now it's your turn. After everything you've heard, who do you believe? Was this silence a strategy or a setup? Did Teyana wait because she was gathering truth, or because this was always going to explode? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this story is far from over. If new receipts come out, if timelines flip, or if someone finally breaks their silence again, you'll hear it here first. Hit like if you want the full truth uncovered. Subscribe if you're ready for the next update, because when the next piece drops, it's going to change everything. Fire.